After months of referring to valid contracts and commitments, McLaren is planning to replace Daniel Ricciardo for the 2023 Formula 1 season after all. McLaren is believed to have decided that it's better to buy Ricciardo out of his final year of his contract so it can steal Oscar Piastri from under the nose of the rival Alpine team. There's been a sensational tug-of-war over reigning Formula 2 champion Piastri in the wake of Fernando Alonso's shock move from Alpine to Aston Martin, and the impact it has on Ricciardo's future is unavoidable. McLaren's big money headline signing is heading for the exit door, but could he leave F1 altogether? It's been made clear over recent months that Ricciardo has a valid contract for 2023 and would therefore need to be paid off or otherwise convinced to walk away. McLaren has always said publicly it stands by Ricciardo and its priority is to make things work. However, save for his day of days at the 2021 Italian Grand Prix, there's been little hint of a real breakthrough. Ricciardo continues to trail Lando Norris, and even on his good days, one senior figure at McLaren told us he's still a couple of tenths away. Given McLaren is paying for a lead driver, someone who Norris could aspire to match, these performances have never looked sustainable. Especially as right now, Ricciardo is costing McLaren 4th place in the Constructors' Championship. So there's a short-term cost to keeping him and a longer-term question mark over whether he can really get it together. It's fair to point out that McLaren's car has flaws and it's not achieved all it wanted to this season. In addition, the one day in their time together that McLaren has had a race-winning car, Monza last year, it was Ricciardo who pounced and made the most of it. But Ricciardo was still the slower driver that weekend, and Norris was instructed not to challenge him to secure the victory and the 1-2. Plus, this isn't really about one-off peaks, it's about a bigger picture. And Ricciardo knew that he couldn't always depend on one undeniably great result when he continued to constantly underperform relative to Norris. As Ricciardo's struggles continued, McLaren's attention turned to working out what would be the better long-term option. That has led to the team's interest in Piastri growing. McLaren is reported to have signed Piastri to an initial 2023 deal during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, and it's thought that Ricciardo was told of McLaren's intentions in Hungary as well. The conclusion is that Piastri offers a low potential downside in the short term, and more importantly, as a driver with big potential, fits well with McLaren's plan of being in the best place possible from 2024 onwards. That's when McLaren will have the facilities to match its ambitions. The 2024 car is likely to be the first to benefit from a new wind tunnel and simulator. It's at this point that McLaren wants to be regularly fighting the top teams, not rivaling Alpine for best of the rest status. If McLaren can get Piastri into its car next year, he will be familiar with the team and have a year's F1 experience by the time McLaren's gunning for bigger results in 2024. While the original plan would have been for Ricciardo to still be in his prime by then, evidently there is no longer faith that that can be realised. Of course, it's possible that if Ricciardo doesn't agree to a payoff, he could continue to race in 2023 with McLaren, with Piastri occupying a reserve driver role for one more year on the sidelines before taking over in 2024. But as McLaren's focus has clearly switched to Piastri, it will likely do whatever's required to get him in the car. And the expected outcome is that Ricciardo won't wish to race for a team that doesn't want him and will accept being paid what he's owed instead. A Piastri move to McLaren would leave Ricciardo out of a drive, and Alpine would be in desperate need of a teammate for Esteban Ocon. So a reunion between the two parties that raced together in 2019 and 2020 would seem like a logical marriage of convenience. Alpine is open to that, although it's not known whether Ricciardo wants to keep racing in F1 or if any deal he does to leave McLaren early would preclude him from driving for another team in 2023. But there have been suggestions that McLaren is seeking a soft exit for Ricciardo, which means finding another team for him to go to, so maybe the bigger question is, would Ricciardo go back to the team he left just a couple of years ago? If he's available and he's interested, then signing Ricciardo would be a far bigger gamble than when what was then called Renault shelled out $25 million a year for his services in 2019 and 2020. In addition to Ricciardo's struggles at McLaren, there is a concern that the 2022 generation of cars just might not be suited to him. So the question is whether he feels a change of team could bring back the old Ricciardo. A reignited Ricciardo, one who can drive the way he wants to, potentially improved by the lessons of his 2 years of strife with McLaren, could be formidable. The upside is massive. The problem is Alpine could just get the McLaren version of Ricciardo. He does remain on paper the best of a limited number of alternatives if Alpine's first choice slips out of its grasp. But that's predicated on Ricciardo getting back to his brilliant best, which is far from guaranteed. And even if Alpine were to pursue him, Ricciardo might not be interested. We asked Alpine team boss Otmar Szafnauer last week if Ricciardo was a candidate, but he said Alpine hadn't thought about a fallback for Piastri and jokingly thanked us for the good recommendation. But what if Alpine needs our suggestion after all? Because if it cannot get Ricciardo, then its options to replace Piastri do look very limited. It will have a choice between drivers from the lower half of the grid like Mick Schumacher, picking someone currently on the sidelines like Nico Hülkenberg or Daniel Kvyat, or taking a punt on a rookie such as Alpine Junior and Formula 2 race winner Jack Doohan. Szafnauer has claimed that more than a dozen drivers have been in touch expressing interest in the Alpine seat, but if it's not Piastri or Ricciardo, the quality will probably be lacking. There has been no confirmation from McLaren or Ricciardo, who has previously insisted he would stick by his contract, that he will definitely leave the team at the end of this year. And while agreeing Ricciardo's exit is one hurdle for McLaren to clear, the other is being 100% sure that Piastri is free to replace him. Piastri is currently Alpine's reserve driver and the team is confident it has a binding agreement with him for 2023. Alpine was so convinced by this deal that the team announced Piastri as its 2023 driver without his approval, something he then took to social media to reject. But it's been suggested that while Alpine did have an option, it may not have exercised it in time to deny Piastri the right to pursue a deal with another team. Alpine isn't going to give this up without a fight. Piastri has worked trackside with the team this year, undertaken an extensive 2021 car testing program at various tracks, and done an awful lot of work on the simulator. He was projected to complete more than 5,000 kilometers of testing with Alpine and its 2021 car by the end of this season, and was expected to take part in at least 2 Friday practice sessions. This was all with a view to preparing Piastri for his F1 debut at Williams, at least according to Alpine's plan, before coming back from that loan spell to Alpine itself. This has come at considerable expense to Alpine, and there's a clear feeling that Piastri hasn't shown the required loyalty. That won't matter in a legal context, as it's all about who has a valid contract, but it's interesting that Alpine has started to question Piastri's integrity. Alpine was initially absolutely confident in its legal position, but it must be said that some of its wording has become shakier in places, and there now seems to be a heavier emphasis on what it feels Piastri owed the team after it spent millions investing in him. And that's not necessarily indicative of an explicit contractual breach. But still, Alpine believes there's a case to be resolved by the FIA's Contract Recognition Board, which has final say on team and driver conflicts and has the power to impose financial penalties and force contracts to be upheld in either party's favour. It's interesting to ponder whether Alpine really wants to keep a driver who doesn't want to be there, or could just be seeking compensation for the time and money spent on his junior career, his development, and especially putting him in year-old F1 cars. The prospect of forcing a driver and team to work together when a rift has emerged is not a particularly enticing one. And that doesn't just go for Piastri and Alpine, it can also be applied to McLaren and Ricciardo. We just have to wait to find out how clean the breaks will be, or if this situation could get even messier.